is, June. I told you before that June is my favorite month because it's when my birthday is, June 7th. So I had my birthday recently, and Anthony Fagiano, who's the singer for Midline, who I've been friends with since 1990 and have played in a band with him for 27, 28 years. One of my bestest friends. His birthday is June 10th, so we're just 3 days apart. And so we more or less share a lot of the same friends, and we try to celebrate our birthdays together. And then JB's birthday's coming up the end of this month. So three guys in the band have birthdays in June. And then, of course, Father's Day was was on Sunday, and that's spring is awesome. But one thing that I realized, because I just get caught up with stuff that's busy in thinking about midline, is many of you know, because I've talked about this. If you know me personally and know my story a little bit, when I was 6 years old, my dad died in a plane crash, and that was in June 24th to be exact. And so this Saturday will be the 45th anniversary of that accident. And that was a plane that my dad was flying. It was a small four-person plane, and my dad worked out of town. He was working in Olympia, Washington at the time. As a little kid, I always thought of it being Alaska. He did work in Alaska on the Alaskan pipeline, was a heavy equipment mechanic, and then moved to working for Union Pacific Railroad out of Olympia. So my dad was a sports enthusiast, like motorcycle racing and snowmobiles, and raced race cars and flew airplanes and lots of dangerous things, um, or potentially dangerous things. Um, so that has affected me greatly my entire life, losing my dad at 6 years old. And so I had just barely turned six because that was the beginning of the month. And then my dad's plane crashed on June 24th of 1978. And my dad's birthday is July 12th. So he would have been turning 34. So as of July 12th of this year, my dad would have been turning 79 had he not passed away. And like I mentioned, that accident affected me greatly, emotionally and all of that. And I do have trouble talking about it and not getting worked up. So I have a note here on my paper that says, "Don't cry." So I will do my best. But um, I think about my dad all the time, and I look a lot like my dad did, especially when I was 33. And if you look at pictures of my dad around the same time frame, it's just kind of like, you know. And I think my family sees that reflection, and so especially my grandma Fisher, um, she's still alive, and my aunt that live in near Los Angeles. They get kind of emotional when they see me. Um, so anyway, it's a 45th anniversary of my dad's plane crash, and I used to just get mad about all of that occasionally. Now I will say that by December of that same year, my mom had gotten remarried, and that's a whole nother story. um, because this story has a lot of spider web stories to it. I just remember it as a 6 year old kid. Um, I can look back as a grown man now and look at that situation. Like, if I saw somebody getting remarried 6 months after their husband died, I would have questions, I guess. But I'm very thankful for my stepdad, Tim Wazorek, and he's been dad to me for 45 years, and he's awesome too. So I always call him dad. I never think of him differently as being my dad. And so when you guys hear me refer to my dad, it's always Tim. And so if I refer to Harlan Fisher, then I usually am pretty specific about that. Both of them love of course, dearly. Um, but I was thinking about like my music career and my life and everything that's gone on in my life. And I became interested in drumming when I was 10 years old. And some of you know that story too. I was grew up going to a Baptist church, a Southern Baptist church, I might add. And so anything beyond a piano and some hymns was, uh, was a little bit looked with scrutiny upon. But we did have a concert on a Sunday night at church, and Dave Goff was playing drums. And Dave, is a little bit older than me, but he became my very first drum teacher and got me excited about drumming. And so that's been my life since I was 10, 41 years ago. Excuse me. Um, so I was doing some reflecting over the last couple of years, especially becoming a full-time musician and having amazing mentors in my corner and helping me along this way. And I used to get really kind of down around this time of year because it's the anniversary of my dad's plane crash, and I I now look at it as something that was necessary or maybe was a blessing. And as a believer in God, um, sometimes we have things that happen in our life and we want to blame God for that or question why God does or doesn't do something. And today's culture, um, even saying what I just said would be possibly heavily frowned upon. And so I don't get too far into that very often, if at all, on social media, um, because it's one of those things that you can say you believe in, and then you have a bunch of people attack you for that, for those things, which is pretty unfortunate. But I do kind of think now that had my dad not crashed his plane, had my mom not remarried Tim, I probably wouldn't have the life that I have now. And the life that I have now, I really, really like. I love my wife. I love my kids. I love being a full time drummer. I love my circle of friends. The other side of that coin that just kind of melts your brain is that um, had dad lived, I would have a completely different life probably. And that life, I highly doubt at this point I would be complaining about it. I mean, it would just be whatever that life is. But I highly doubt that it would include music because nobody in our family was musical as I know, other than my sister Susie and I both took piano lessons as little kids, as most little kids do. Um, but you know, like I said, my dad was heavy into racing motorcycles and race cars, and that might have been my path instead, and being a mechanic or something. I don't know. You can't go back and change those things. So now at this point in my life, I feel like maybe his death was necessary and probably a blessing. As awful as that may seem on the surface, I think if you really thought about that, then you might go, oh yeah. So I think that God knows what He's doing. So yeah, it's just it's a tragedy, but with that is usually blooms other things. And I mean, if you want to do it, equate it to death and decay makes it necessary for new life. There's that if we lived in a desert, well, I guess we kind of typically kind of do live in a high desert atmosphere here in Idaho, but I think you guys know what I mean. Like, we need rain, we need sunshine, we need storms, we need um, spring and fall, and that whole circle of stuff. Um, man, I didn't mean to get heavy on you guys if you feel that way. But I was just thinking about that because Saturday is the anniversary of that happening. So if you have never heard the song that I wrote, with my midline brothers. It's called Wreckage. It is a literal, factual, lyrically song about my dad's plane crash and its effect on me. And um, so the chorus of that song is did you think about me? Did you think about me when the wreckage was falling 17,000 feet from the ground? And it was something that I always wondered as a kid. Like, my dad in that moment was going through something terrible. And to be honest, I don't know if they even realized, because my dad had another husband and wife and their 6-year-old son with them, and they were all flying back to Caldwell. So all four of them passed away in this accident. But I've read, my mom gave, here's the other here's the other side of the story a little bit. This accident happened, and yes, it was very, very terrible. My mom went to court for 3 years after that, and thankfully, my grandpa Fisher was there to help her navigate all of that, because the court hearings happened in Portland, Oregon, and my grandpa had been living just outside of Portland, Oregon. Um, So I remember riding Greyhound buses back and forth to Portland with my mom and my sister as this was going on. But the family of the family that was with my dad was suing my mom for several $1 million, um, uh, because basically a wrongful death suit situation. And I have all of those court papers. I also have all of the transcripts from the FAA on the accident, so I know at least what the last words my dad had as far as communication with the air traffic control towers. So if there was anything said beyond that, I'm not aware. Um, but if you've flown airplanes, been in commercial, when you feel a little bit turbulence or something like that happen, it kind of makes you a little bit nervous. So this was a small plane being literally thrown around in the air because of a bad storm that they got into or got trapped inside of. And this happened in Baker City, Oregon, by the way, is where the plane crashed. Um, the weather got so bad, and it was a plane with instruments, and I'm not a pilot or an expert. I'm just telling you what I know, is that the FAA, the control towers based out of Salt Lake City, were trying to get my dad to look outside for visual bearings and also instrumentation. And supposedly going back and forth like that is not something you're supposed to do. You're supposed to rely 100% on one or the other. Because if you go back and forth like that, apparently that disorients orientation. What am I trying to say? Screws pilots up with where they are or what's going on. So that was part of what happened. But again, the storm was so terrible and tossing this plane around that part of the tail and the wing broke off in the air. And so once that happened, it just caused the plane to spiral straight into the ground. And it was, you know, where we live, it gets dark, starts getting darker at 10 o'clock, and this happened just before 10. So there were reports that people saw this plane hit the ground that were driving by on the freeway. So it's always odd to be on Interstate 84 and go past Baker City, Oregon, and the interchange where wreckage of the plane was hitting the ground. And so a lot of the coroner reports. Man, I'm getting deep on this. Sorry. Maybe it's necessary for the story. I don't know, but I going back to the lyrics. I was just like wondering, like, what was going through my dad's head, like what was he thinking when all of this happened. Maybe he was 100% focused on the situation, and these other thoughts never occurred to him. But part of the coroner reports was that they all four of them most likely had died before the plane even hit the ground, just because of altitude, lack of air, those kind of things. So they most likely passed out, then died, and then the plane crashed. So I would, at first I thought there was a lot of pain and suffering, and probably none of that is true. Um, I think you just go through something, then you're out, and then you're gone, and you don't know that that even happened, and and I talked about, I talked about this before with my own car crash on the freeway, that I had no time to panic, in that accident when I rolled my truck, and I thought I was going to, the only thought that passed through my head was, this is it, and then I was out. So I imagine that might have been the same thing for my dad and the passengers in the plane, that there might have been a moment of panic, but as far as pain and suffering, I really highly doubt that that was the case. Um, so anyway, going back to how literal the lyrics are, is like the first verse talks about, I think about you every day. Um, uh, no voice, just a face. So I have no recordings of what my dad's voice sounded like, but I have a lot of pictures. Maybe not even a lot of pictures, but I have pictures. So, but I don't have any recordings of what my dad's voice sounded like. So that's, I think about you every day, and no voice, just a face, because all I have are a book of pictures of my dad. And then there's things that remind me of my dad all the time, other than looking in the mirror, is that I have this whole uh, tool chest full of tools with his name engraved on them, because he was a mechanic for a living. So things like that. And then like literal, did you think about me when the wreckage was falling 17,000 feet from the ground? That's where the FAA penned an altitude to where the plane was unrecoverable, was at 17,000 feet. So by the time that the plane was coming apart and started its spiral into the ground, was at 17,000 feet. So it very well was higher in altitude when it started coming apart. It was just, that's where the FAA had pinned the spiral to have started, was at 17,000 feet. So um, it's pretty deep lyrically, and it's like talks about, on the longest day the news will break. So the longest day is the first day of summer, and so that was the first day of summer in 1978. Was when that accident happened. So there's a lot of very literal lyrics to that song. And my dad was 33, like I said, so he was almost 34. He would be turning 79 in July of this year, if he were still alive. And I wrote that song when I was 33. My mom had given me like all of that information from the FAA and the court documents and everything. My parents tend to do this where they're just cleaning house and then they bring stuff over, but this was pretty heavy stuff. And so going through all of that and all the emotional breakdown I had reading and going through that stuff was really, really heavy. And it was just like this heavy weight on my shoulders to write this song. And I just started writing in a notebook. I was writing my feelings down, exactly how I felt, and along with the information on that I had, 17,000 feet in those. There's some other things in there too. The first day of summer, um, things like that. That I just wrote the story, and of course I crafted it going forward. And I had the melody of the chorus in my head, and I'm not a I'm not a singer by any stretch of the imagination, but I had told Scott Elliott, who at the time, I said, "Hey, I wrote this song called The Wreckage," and I think it's typical of any band when your drummer comes to the band and says, "Hey, I wrote a song," that everybody in the band kind of raises an eyebrow and says, "Oh yeah, okay, well here." we'll entertain this thought, and then we'll put it in the trash along with the other songs you tried to write. Um, but Scott immediately, without even hearing it, said, "Why call it the Wreckage? Why don't we just call it Wreckage?" And I was okay with that. And I told him, "No, seriously, this is like I gotta do this. We have to do this." And so Scotty and I got together in our rehearsal room that we had at the time, and I started singing to him the melody I had for the chorus. And so he worked that out on the guitar, and then I just lost it, like tears, just really. It was an emotional thing, and the whole band shared a lot of tears as we got this song put together. And so we had the chorus worked out, and then I kind of had an idea for the verse, but I wasn't really sure what to do. And Stymie immediately had music for the verses, just like it just came to him. And then Anthony, of course, fell right into what we did. We kept, as any songwriting session goes, you keep refining this as you go along, and ended up with this song that was really cleansing for me, and it was an emotional experience for the band. And after my mom had heard it, she wrote a really sweet, nice long letter to the band, being really encouraging and supporting it and appreciating the song. And I couldn't read it. I mean, I had read it on my own, but it was important for the band to hear it. And I think Scott started trying to read it, and he couldn't keep it together. And so Anthony finished reading the letter to the whole band, and choking his way through that. And it was heavy stuff. And prior to recording that, we were recording that album that we called Wreckage. And I don't show anybody this stuff because it's hard to look at. But in the newspapers when that came out, that crash had happened, were pictures of the wreckage. There was like 5 different pictures of a crumpled mess of airplane and dirt. And it's it's rough to look at those, just for me personally, but it's tough for people to look at and go, people died in that, you know. And knowing how that the plane had been in a certain position, and that the police and rescue had to move things to free the bodies of trapped passengers in the plane and the pilot and those kind of things. Um, at any rate, so I showed those pictures to Anthony right before he sang the vocals for it, and I think it helped bring some of those feelings out in the vocals when we did that. And it really worked. And then later on, years later, uh, we had a guy that saw the band, and he was into video production and stuff. We filmed a music video for that, so that music video, Wreckage, is on our YouTube page. So if you want to go check that out, um, it's kind of cool because you had to tell that story visually quickly. And so we had some people that in our circle that were former police, and my sister is in the video playing the role of my mom, and then my son Christian is also in the video playing the role of me as a kid. And I think it really worked. It really works when you are watching the video. You'll see my son Christian, playing the role of me, and he has this little toy car that he's playing with. And at the very end of the video, I hit my last hit, and then I grab that same car and I set it on my cymbal. And so it kind of connects, like, oh, that character is the drummer of the band. And so the last thing that my dad had ever bought for me was a toy Tonka cement truck. It was kind of big, and I still have it. It's in my archives of stuff. That was the last thing that my dad bought me. So um, kind of a little Easter egg in the video for people who really knew that story, is seeing Christian playing with this little car, and then at the very end, it's me that puts that on the cymbal, and it's like, oh, the little kid in the video is the drummer. Um, really good for the soul, I guess you could say, going through that whole process of making the video, writing this song. And then now in recent years, like I said earlier, is that tragedy, as horrible as it is, I now look at that as it was a necessary thing, a blessing, that happened. Um, so when stuff's going bad for you, maybe maybe look at it a little bit differently. Like, this is necessary, for the future growth of what's going on in my life, and some of it's pretty hard to stomach stuff, because we all got stuff, um, to a certain degree. So it's easy to be caught up in my day to day of commitments with music. As much, you know, I don't ever want to look at it as like, oh, that's a drag, I got to do that. But everybody has a job, and they have moments where like, oh, okay. But now I go, oh, okay, I'm going to pick up some sticks today and do some drumming. So anyway, I don't know what else to say about that exactly. I made it through, and no tears. uh, which is, it came close. I felt it like moving. You know, when you're gonna get emotional, you kind of feel that moving through your body, and you're like, other parts of your body like trying to push that back. I did feel some of that starting to get there, and then just reminding I had my note, my don't cry cry note. But anyway, go hug your family, and love your dad, love your mom, love your siblings. Okay.